There we go. Welcome to the Vermont House Appropriations Committee. It is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. We are just returning after lunch. It's a little bit after 1, a couple minutes off after we enjoyed our lunch. We're glad to be together, but our first witness here that we've invited is Representative Lalone. I never say that right.
You said it right.
Did I say it? Who is going to present to us in an effort to prepare not just for VAA, but for the FY25 budget in the big picture of where we are in a lot of the work that he's been working with the entities around public safety, the court system, state's attorneys. You've got a lot of moving parts. And instead of hearing from each one of them separately on this, thank you for coming in, and hopefully you're going to give us your big idea.
Yes.
Or roll it all into the whole enchilada.
Yeah, happy.
So go ahead. For the record, sir.
Martin Malone, representative from South Burlington and chair of the House Judiciary Committee. And I'm going to try to share my screen and see how this goes. I'm technically challenged, so.
There we go. Do we have this?
It should be on, I don't think you have printouts because I just brought it with me and just gave it to, I've sent it to Erin so she can post it.
How long ago, sir? Only because you have no idea the miracles that woman can make.
Stack, I don't think.
It's been
So,
posted and I have hard copies.
there we go.
Okay.
Hard copies on the way. So this is table setting, as you kind of mentioned, and explaining really what we're up against with respect to public safety and access to justice. And you're right, I've had a number of discussions with courts, with state's attorneys, with victim advocates, with the Defender General's office, with community justice centers, with legal aid, with the bar, and others. And so hopefully this will be helpful for you in understanding what we are facing. So I just want to start with just a kind of an understanding of what public safety means. And really it's actual safety that people have, but it's also a perception of safety. And we're certainly seeing that throughout the state is a perception that we are not safe. So crime is definitely an important part of this, and the perception of crime as well, which undermines a community sense of safety. It undermines really public safety. And really that stable families and stable communities that are really necessary to reduce crime and promote public safety. And there are a number of issues that are necessary to pay attention to for stable communities and stable families. And I've listed them here. There's availability of substance use treatment. There's availability of mental health treatment, of housing, of education opportunities, employment opportunities, just to name some, that are actually not within Judiciary Committee's purview to a large extent, although I will touch on a couple of these issues on how the judiciary can be of assistance, the Judiciary Committee and the courts with respect to this. Those issues as well are in and of themselves important parts of public safety. It's not just crime that can result if you have these issues. Having homelessness, having individuals with substance use disorder, these are issues that in and of themselves affect a sense of security and safety in the community. And I know that other committees are working on these issues, not necessarily with a focus on underlying crime that can occur, but just on the basics of public safety. So again, we're at the end of the pipeline, the Judiciary Committee, meaning that we are dealing with the societal failures. We're dealing with not having sufficient mental health treatment, substance use treatment, homelessness, et cetera, and poverty really being one of the main underlying factors for crime. So I'm going to go over some crime statistics, and there are certainly, I don't have the statistics on the perception. I think you probably all have had that really brought to you from your constituents and from other representatives that there is this certain perception of crime increasing and people not feeling safe. There was a big, long article in the Burlington Free Press this morning. There's been lots of articles in the press about the perception. And I want to talk a little bit about the reality, which in fact, there has been an increase in crime in Vermont. And you can see here, this is from FBI data, and it just gives you just a quick snapshot of how things have been going since 2019 to 2022. It does not include, the next few slides don't include 2023 statistics. They're not available yet from the FBI. But this shows that Vermont has experienced certainly an increase in violent crime. And I'm going to kind of try not to rush through these, but I have quite a few slides. Or actually, I'll back up. These are not slides. This is old school PDF. I don't know how to use PowerPoint, and both of my kids, neither of my kids are at home to help me out. So this is old school here. In any event, property crimes reported to law enforcement has been going up as well. But it says negative 33, but that's negative 33% since 2012. This is a 10-year slot. So shot. So you can see that actually we're doing fine since 2012 relative to that. But the last couple of years, and my understanding is this year as well, we're seeing an increase of property crime. In a couple of slides from now, we'll show that a little more clearly. Here's again some more detailed statistics about property crimes. And actually since 2012, you'll note that motor vehicle theft has in fact gone up. Larceny is a little bit down from 2012, but again has been going up the last couple of years. Although burglary, interestingly, has not been going up, has actually been going down. Here we have violent crime, and this is going the wrong way, certainly since 2012 as well. And this, again, is through 2022. And as folks are aware, we haven't seen this trend change in 2023. We continue to see an increase in violent crime. And these kind of break down as far as where we are seeing the increase in violent crime. Homicide, the last couple of years, has been a significant driver of that. So I have some local statistics from a couple different communities just to give a little flavor, because this brings us a little closer up to date. Hopefully you can see that okay. It's a little bit small, and I'm not going to, well, let me see if I can.
We have, at least, we've got our copies now here, but those on the screen might be a little tough.
Well, I don't know what I just let me see if I can get this back to small.
Look at it.
There we go. All right. Sorry about that. So you can see here that definitely retail theft has been going up. Larceny into motor vehicles is going up. We need to have a campaign for people to lock their doors of their vehicles. Stolen cars have remained pretty consistent. But certainly a lot of what you hear is a concern about retail theft. And that is not just in Burlington, South Burlington. It is in Burlington. It is in other communities. The next slide, I know it doesn't say where it's from, but that's what happens when you have a PDF and don't know how to edit PDFs. But that is Rutland. And this shows you, it gives you a general sense that there's been an increase of calls to law enforcement for any number of issues. This doesn't specifically address what folks are being called for or why people are calling into law enforcement, but it does show an increase of individuals reaching out to law enforcement.
I'm sorry, these are calls to 911 or to the local or local?
It is to the dispatch. It would be to the dispatch, and if there are direct calls, it's my understanding that that's...
You said this is Rutland?
This is Rutland, yes. So it's the number of inbound calls to the dispatch center as well as the proactive cases generated by the officer. So the officer can also note, an incident or a call that's come in. And I'm happy to slow down. I'm going fairly quickly, I understand, but.
We've got a lot there, and we've got a half an hour more with you, and we're going to hear page 72.
All right, excellent. So the next slide, I think the main thing to look at is towards the bottom and seeing how much of an increase there's been in various property crimes as far as larceny of automobiles, larceny into motor vehicles, and retail theft. All
Still
those,
Rutland?
This is also Rutland. All of those are going up significantly, the property crime. So really the purpose of these slides, and I'm sure there's other information, but this is the information I was able to gather, does show that, yes, indeed, there is, it's not just perception, it is reality. There is an increase over the last 3 years of offenses. And we will see that in some of the court statistics that we're going to see as well, which I will be going to momentarily. So the criminal justice system, the roles are there are multiple roles: retribution, rehabilitation, incapacitation, and deterrence. What I'm focusing on here is deterrence. This is really the focus of our efforts for trying to resource the criminal justice system appropriately. So really, there's lots of literature on deterrence, and I did provide one study that's probably a little bit dated, and I can get additional studies if they're needed. But there's often looking at the probability and the severity of consequences and their deterrence effects. Lots of studies suggest that severity of punishment does not have great deterrent effect. And in fact, there's studies that show that probation is better than incarceration. But that's also not my focus here. My focus is on the probability of the consequences. And there are lots of studies that say that it's the probability of consequences that have the greatest deterrent effect. And this is critical for this whole presentation and what I'm trying to do. It seems to be our primary, I believe, from the many conversations I've had, our primary lever to address the crime that is occurring outside of the issues that are not in front of my committee. I mean, let's get treatment and let's get substance use disorder taken care of, et cetera.
Housing.
Poverty and housing, et cetera. But when it comes to once you've got to the criminal justice system, what's the best approach for addressing crime? That is the probability of the consequences. And there are two components to that. There's the chances of being caught, and that's primarily law enforcement. Again, not in my committee. I've been talking to Mike McCarthy. There, from what I understand, it's not a resource issue as much as it is applicants for the job of law enforcement. They have the resources to pay for law enforcement, but they don't have the people applying to become law enforcement officers. So that's a separate issue that I know that the Government Operations Committee is trying to look at how they might be able to help there. So the other part of it is the certainty and the expediency of consequences. And that is directly related to courts and state's attorneys and defenders. How quickly are we processing these cases? How quickly after an offense, are there consequences? And the further those are apart, the less deterrent effect you can have on the offenses. And there's obviously additional reasons that you want to have quick or at least more expedient and certain consequences, certainly for the victim as well, certainly for actually the offender who might be held on bail or without bail. So there's a liberty interest as well. So as long as these, we have extended periods of time before cases are actually processed and dealt with, there's multiple negative effects that can occur. So I have a number of slides which I will do my best to explain. And if there are in-depth questions, I do have a friend that I can phone a friend. Judge Zone is here, was kind enough to show up in case you had some questions that I'm unable to respond to. So this is the model time standards that are set by the national, and I can't remember already, right at the bottom it says National Center for State Courts. And I don't want you to look at all these. The ones I'm focusing on are really the top left, the felony, that 98% should be dealt with in 365 days. The misdemeanors, that 98% should be dealt with in 180 days. And you're going to be seeing some statistics as far as what shows how the courts are doing in Vermont. So going to the next. So first of all, this shows the standards that the court in Vermont has, which again for misdemeanors, it's actually two standards: 180 days for standard track, 270 days for more complex. The documents that I'm going to show you only look at 180 days because the Odyssey system currently can't distinguish between the complex and standard cases. And for felonies, you'll see that it's 365 days for the standard and complex cases. So.
Yep, Representative.
Yes.
I'm the layperson here, but looking at this national guideline, best practices, whatever, says 75% of felonies within 90 days. And our guideline in Vermont, if I'm reading this right, is 365 days.
Right. We don't have guidelines that say, what do we want for 75%? What do we want for 90%? What do we want by 98%? We have just 100%. Well, it's never going to be 100%. There's complications always. So that's a completely unrealistic goal to have 100%. But they haven't broken them down to like 3 different stages. It's just, have you met the standard out?
Okay. So half of these could be resolved earlier. We just don't have it in these numbers. Is that what you're
Correct.
saying?
And this is our standard, not what's happening.
This is the model standard. The next page here are the standards that are being applied. And we'll proceed and you'll see how we're meeting on some of those standards. So I've done a couple different counties, and if we're running short on time, I'll just do one county. But the data that I sent you shows, or the documents you have all the counties. So if you want to look at your particular county, you can do so. But what this is showing, that this graph is showing for felonies and misdemeanors on a monthly basis, how many cases are being disposed of. And it's showing you how many of the cases are under the time period. So with respect to felonies, under 365 days, and how many are exceeding, the case age exceeded 365 days. Doesn't necessarily tell you the details of those, but it gives you just kind of a general sense.
So the darker the green, the longer it's
The dark green is under the 365-day period.
And then it's the lighter.
We want them all dark green.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So here's a slightly different looking graph, but kind of gets at the same point. This is the number of active cases that are pending. And I can get in the difference between active and pending, but that's probably a little more detail we need at this point. Because there are more cases than just this. It's just some are not active. They're in treatment court, for instance, or there could be other reasons why they're not considered active cases. Any event. So this shows you on a monthly basis how many active cases there are that are under 365 days, and those that are near 365 days, and those are over 365 days for the felonies, and 180 days for the misdemeanors. What does this show you? It shows you that we have a lot of cases that are over that time frame that is the standard, is the goal right now. I'm going to go ahead to the next.
Yep.
This is an important graph as well, and this explains. It's looking at the number of cases that have come in a particular month versus the number of cases that have gone out. So you want to have over 100% because that means we're dealing with these older cases with the backlog, the so-called backlog. So on months that are 74%, for instance, you're falling further behind that month. Those that are at over 100%, you're catching up. And there'll be a graph that kind of really hits home on this point.
Martin, go back to the other page. Do any of these include the backlog that's a result of the pandemic?
I would say a great number of them probably are because of the pandemic. And you will see there will be a graph that really hits that point in just a minute or two, which I'll be showing you. So this next one I think is quite interesting. And this is for Chittenden County, and it tells you the age, and this is as of December 15th this year. It tells you the age of all the cases as of that date. And I can tell you that for Chittenden, the felony cases, I did a little math, which is very scary. And this, you guys can check all my numbers, but 21% of the cases are over 360 days for felonies. And 38% of the cases are over 180 days for the misdemeanors. So we're not hitting that 98%, in other words. That this is one way that you can see that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to I'm going to only jump to one slide, two slides relative to Rutland. So I want a couple ahead because I wanted you to see this particular slide as far as active pending cases by disposition. So looking at the Rutland misdemeanor, what you can see there is that since Ian Sullivan actually took over, became the state's attorney, he's really been working on trying to whittle away at the backlog. And this shows that you see those cases, particularly looking at the misdemeanor cases, that he has a downward trend of those that are over 180 days. So for him, I'm going to jump past the clearance rate. Well, actually, on the clearance rate, you can see on the Rutland misdemeanor that almost every month they're over 100%, and that just another way of reflecting, which is progress. But when you look at all their cases in the case age, they have still a lot of work to do because the felony cases, and these are pending cases, not just active cases, but all cases. 42% are over 365 days still, and the misdemeanors, 61% of misdemeanors are over 180 days. So they're doing a lot of work to whittle those down, but there's a lot of work to be done. So that's just gives you some county level pictures, and the next few pages or slides is statewide data. And so once again, I'm not going to spend much time on that. I'm going to jump ahead because I think these are self-explanatory. I'm happy to answer questions on it, but it's essentially showing there are a lot of old felony cases and old misdemeanor cases. But when you get to the clearance rates, which is particularly interesting, you're seeing that the clearance rates aren't quite as good. And actually, jumping ahead, I can tell you the felony clearance rate, the crime clearance rate is 106%. And we kind of need to do better than that. And I think the court definitely recognizes that. Sorry, I'm jumping around, or not jumping, I'm jumping ahead.
It's your time.
Yeah,
I mean, we're all ears.
So this particular document is interesting. It tells you again the number of cases that are over 365 days. It's 36% of the felony cases are over 365 days. And the misdemeanor cases, 53% are over 180 days. And you'll note towards the bottom on the misdemeanor, there's 1,160 that are 720 days. They're over 2 years old. And to have the potential consequences being that far off from the offense, you're not going to get any deterrence value. So to compare, I have some data in the next couple pages from that shows some 2019 statistics. And the age of the felony cases, actually 51% are over 6 months, but that's not 365 days, so you can't exactly compare the two. But I think if you look at misdemeanors, 34% in 2019 were over the 180 days as compared to the 53% that we're looking at currently.
And this is statewide, right?
This is statewide data, right, from 2019. The next document shows the time to disposition, and you will note that actually at that point, they were looking at 4 months instead of 6 months for misdemeanors. And looking at the misdemeanors, you can see that 60% were being resolved within 4 months. So things have gotten a little more backed up. And I think the next page really shows that point. The pre-pandemic numbers in the criminal, and really focusing on the criminal division right now, they had almost 16,000 cases filed in that year, and 7,500 were still pending at the end of the year. So they got rid of quite a few. As opposed to the fiscal year 2023, 12,500 new cases filed, and they're at 15,000.
They went up, not down.
Kind of the wrong direction.
All right.
The next slides, and really the one to focus on is just the criminal, is to see what kind of clearance rate we have in dealing with that backlog. And as I mentioned before, it's 106%. I'm not really focused on the civil dockets and such, but I figured I would include these for your information.
They're both making ground, just not a lot with the.
Correct. Yes. And the clearance rate is not the only, clearance rate is, there's a lot of different ways to look at this. The main way I'm trying to look at it is how long is it taking between a case being filed and the consequences. Clearance rate is one point that's showing you we're getting rid of those very old cases, but that's not necessarily telling us how we're doing as far as that underlying issue of we need to have expeditious and certain consequences. But what I think all these slides do show is that there's an issue there. And I think a big part of it is the resources that the court has. So part of that has been judicial vacancies, which are not necessarily an issue for this committee. I do have a bill that we're going to be working on that will broaden the applicant pool and try to expedite that process. So this past year, they've been down a number of judges for a good part of the year, although that's not the only issue, because they've had judges who have retired, that those positions are presumably vacant, are continuing to work. So it's not as bad as it sounds, because we've had our retired judges working hard. So it's not just the fact that we are filling these vacancies. We've filled, I think it's eight this year, I believe. Is it 8 vacancies we filled this year? Did I get that right? Yeah. So, 3 of them earlier this year, 5 just in November. I believe the last person was to be sworn in this week. So even with the vacancies filled, this isn't enough to resolve the issue, because it's not just the judges, and I do know that the courts will be asking for additional judge positions. It's the staff. Staff are very critical in the courts to move things along, particularly with the Odyssey system as well. Kind of there's many benefits to the Odyssey system, but it does take more time as well. And the state's attorneys and the defenders as well. It's all these factors, they work together. And this is where Trevor's going to work his magic and find out where the best pinch points are as we continue on to say, well, where are the resources most needed? I have my suspicions right now already that it's not necessarily the courts, except for the staff and judges, but it's at the defender's office would be probably my number one, and the state's attorneys, as far as my various conversations, to be able to move these cases.
You're right, Representative Squirrel has.
We've been working together on this.
It's good.
Can I just ask,
Sure.
I'm not remembering, did the judiciary come forward with a request for additional judges last year?
They did. They asked for one additional judge. Actually, the Judiciary Committee thought they weren't asking for enough, and we actually recommended two, and they were given one. You listen to the courts instead of to Judiciary Committee, but maybe.
Listen to the checkbook most of all.
Woody has a question as well.
Okay, hang on.
I'm sorry, Representative Page.
Representative Page, hang on for just a minute. Representative Harrison is coming in.
So understanding we're not making enough progress on the backlog and maybe processing these cases, it could be staffing issues. And you mentioned the state's attorneys, the defenders, all of that. But could some of it also be related to repeat offenders who are clogging up the system? I mean, we just had a settlement in Rutland. I think the offender had 32 outstanding cases that were settled as one part of grand bargain. But that's 32 times that one person is using the system to be arraigned and processed and have their day in court. If we didn't take care of it on the first or second time, if we did, maybe we could have avoided 30 other visits.
Right. So that may be part of it. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, that's certainly a part that gets a lot of attention. But there are also, more complicated cases that are coming in right now, as my next slide will show. For instance, the state's attorneys and therefore the courts and defenders are dealing with 80 murder or attempted murder cases right now, which are very complicated. I mean, and it's a matter of judicial resources and setting priorities. That yes, there may be there may be a repeat offender who has a number of property crimes and such, which are definitely important for people's perception of safety as well. But you may also have, and you do have, as you probably saw yesterday, as the statistics as far as 40% of the calls into law enforcement are domestic violence cases, and there's relief for abuse orders that have to be dealt with. So it's priority setting and we're encouraging the court to adjust maybe priorities or certainly look at, when you have that repeat offender, that's one part. We have a separate bill which deals with retail theft, which is one of the areas where there are a lot of repeat offenders. And this would allow aggregation of the value of separate incidents to be one case and possibly making it a felony as well. That's getting at one area where there are a lot of repeat offenders. It's not necessarily resolving all of those issues. But my understanding is that that's not the only issue. That is not the only issue.
We've got 5 minutes left with you. I want to make sure that the state's attorneys and the others, but Representative Page?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. My colleagues and I, we sat in on one day at some court proceedings here in Newport. And we recognize that there is a backlog and work is being done, to make progress on that. But maybe you will address this, Martin or Representative Lalonde. And the concern is that is with some of these judicial rulings, which I think maybe Representative Harrison was alluding to as well. There is a concern there that some of these rulings are not are not beneficial to the public in related to safety. And maybe you will be addressing this here shortly. I don't know.
So I'm not necessarily directly addressing this shortly, but what I'm focusing on for the Appropriations Committee is not what those consequences are at the end, whether that's more incarceration, probation, deferred sentence, there's deferral to CJCs, to community justice centers. I'm not talking about the consequences, what those are so much. It's the time frame between the offense and the
We have enough
consequence.
staff to process this in a
Right.
timely manner.
Because the consequence, again, there are studies that say that probation, you have much better outcomes than incarceration, for instance. So courts that are focusing on doing more probation, they're following what the research says is a higher deterrence value. One of our other bills is looking at expanding pre-charge diversion, and something we're working with Trevor on as well on that. And that is to have, if you have pre-charge diversion, you have even closer consequences. It's in a different route through a community justice center and restorative justice, but it's still consequences close to the offense. And also takes pressure off the courts.
And victim advocates piece of it, because sometimes they.
And victim advocate, yes, I mean, they're part of the diversion process as well, so.
Well, that's all well and good, and I get it. But there is a perception out there that, the rulings are not, it's not as strong as perhaps they should be. So I'll just leave it there.
We'll ask the court about that when we have them in front of our committee. So state's attorneys, I think what you're seeing here mostly is that they have very high caseloads, but one shouldn't just look at the caseloads to determine how many state's attorneys should be in particular offices. It's the workload, and that these are two very different things. Caseload, you look at the number of active or pending cases, but they're doing a lot more. The time that they spend, for instance, on helping investigations in the murders, for instance, I've heard from Rutland and Ian Sullivan and how much time they're spending with for doing that kind of work. You don't capture the whole thing by just looking at the caseload. One has to kind of dig down, and I don't have those answers, but I expect the state's attorneys are continuing to work on that as far as, where is the biggest need in the 14 state's attorneys' offices. And that has to do with workload. It has to do with how, I would also suggest, as I do in here, how much of a backlog the particular court has and the particular county has. So these are different factors that I think all need to work together to really determine the extent of their need. I'm here to say certainly there is a need, but I can't tell you, do they need 10, do they need 20, and where are those positions needed most? But that's something that I've
It'd
been.
be safe to assume that between now and we get to January, I'm thinking either BAA or FY25, that we'll have a better idea of maybe where that balance is and how many
Yes.
representatives we're on.
Yeah, I'm meeting we've done a lot of joint meetings with these groups. And we have a sense of what those asks are. It's a bit more FY25. I think there's getting enough BAA stuff here. And we're trying to fine tune those asks and make sure we understand them.
Thank you.
Madam Chair?
Yes. Representative Dolan, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And this is a very informative presentation. I thank you for this. One question in terms of this caseload, and it appears so crushing. I imagine they get such a burnout and perhaps it has an impact on the workforce itself of state attorneys. Are they seeing any of that kind of play out where it appears so crushing that attorneys are leaving?
I think, I am seeing that, or just from my discussions, and judges, I think, are at risk of burning out, or maybe that's part of the reason why we've seen so many retire. But in state's attorneys, the turnover, I haven't heard that turnover is, the retention is as big of an issue as just getting enough individuals to fill positions that we've given them. But I would imagine that if we don't deal with this, that could become a bigger issue.
And my second part of that question is, are they too subject to a 3% cap in their budgets when they put together budgets for our consideration?
They may be recommended, but no, Representative Dolan, the court system is a separate branch of government.
Okay, I knew that, but just curious to know when they put their budgets together, to what extent they.
Defender's office, for instance, is,
Yes.
and they're actually, to follow that, would have to cut I think it's 8 to 10 positions, which is absolutely the wrong direction to go. And I can show you this one slide shows you the percentage.
Before you go, Representative
Oh, I'm
Squirrel,
sorry.
you have something?
No, I think Mark responded to judiciary is outside.
Outside, but not.
Everybody else is subject to the same process. But I am aware, I've had conversations with the administration about the work that we're doing. And I believe, as Adam Gresham was sitting here saying, that it's not going to be 3% across the board. Probably some ups and downs and some adjustments to that. And I think he has an eye to the criminal justice system when he says adjustments to that. I don't know what that's going to look like.
So I have 2 quick points on the defenders and just want to finish up with a couple things. So I do have the slide that shows the percentage increase of their caseload, which I think is, speaks for itself. But there's a recent study that is for best practices as far as the number of the caseload that defenders should carry. And having communicated with Matt Valerio, the Defender General, he says they have looked at that and they would have to double the number of defenders that they have to actually meet that standard. I don't think that, that's not what they're going to be asking for. But it kind of gives you a sense of where they are. I'm not going to read this to you. I was going to, but I'm running out of time, and they're wonderful words. I suggest, this really kind of hits on the issues that I've been talking about, and I'm going to jump to kind of just some of the other things, and I've already mentioned some of this already. The amendment to the nominating process to make sure that we have a fully staffed court. Reducing pressure on the courts through our pre-charge diversion efforts, addressing repeat offenders through retail theft, and actually an expansion of treatment courts, which I believe will be part of the judiciary's ask. And one other point on the root causes, there is a role for the judiciary certainly to play there, and that one is with the treatment courts, but also it's with the legal assistance to individuals of limited means. And a lot of these individuals are facing homelessness, are facing debt cases against them. There's lots of different stresses on folks who are in poverty, and poverty certainly is one of the drivers of crime as well. And my last wonderful words there, this is the last document here, it really explains that a little bit more in depth on that particular aspect of the problem. I know that there's an ask from the Vermont Access to Justice Coalition, and that gets at that issue. The proper funding of legal aid also gets to that issue. And to the extent that we're getting the courts moving along more rapidly and efficiently, the needs of that community are going to go up as well. One thing I didn't talk about is some of the things, drugs, the drug crimes are, and substance use is a big part of driving the issues that we're facing. The Senate is actually starting with that aspect of at least what we deal with in the Judiciary Committee, although House Human Services and their efforts for harm reduction, which this is a good segue for what you're going to be hearing next, is very critical as far as what we're trying to deal with and that underlying root cause of some of these criminal behaviors.
So if I was to sum this up, and we'll send you on your way while you're here, is because we were anticipating that this body, the House and the Senate, is going to be putting together what would be hopefully a totally comprehensive piece of a bill and or need for money resources to start to get this whole system, not just a piece of it, in a better place.
Correct. Yeah.
So staying in tune with you, Representative Squirrel. Meet your future.
I've already met it.
I thank you for the time and happy as you look at other information, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me and,
Thank you for all this detail too.
yeah.
And
Madam Chair, may I ask one last question?
you
if I
sure
may?
can. Go right ahead. I'm going to clip this.
Thank you. And I do appreciate the focus on the criminal justice system in particular. But I want to note that civil cases, I suspect, are equally substantial. I was talking to the executive director of the Human Rights Commission, for example, and their caseload on average is not clearing for 2 to 3 years. I mean, each case takes 2 to 3 years to get through, and they're seeing an increase in caseload of civil rights compliance with federal law. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention. I'm sure you're quite aware of it, but I think there's a bigger issue about resource needs across our judiciary system.
And just one last real quick thing is on January 10th, we're having a joint hearing with Senate Judiciary Committee looking at these issues, and maybe we'll try to get Representative Squirrel away from you on that morning if possible. We'll learn more. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
For taking the time to get us up, or at least introduced to this.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a big deal.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, so next on our agenda is we are not voting on things until we're actually back in session. But in order to keep expediting things along the way, we have on our wall a bill H-72 that we're going to be looking at first thing when we come back in on the 3rd. So we can hear from the sponsors, Ledge Council, and the joint fiscal note. So just so you know ahead of time, I've got a schedule to take this bill up and out on the 3rd. So we're going to hear from people now, but if you have additional questions or something that you feel you want to have information on, let me know and I'll see if I can get that scheduled for the 3rd.
Okay.
Great. With that, on over. The trio, well, we'll bring you over during fiscal note. Is that, okay. It's only because we have 3 chairs. But if you want to come,
They're the man, just the copy.
All right, for those of you at home paying attention, this is H-72. It's been on our wall. It's from the previous session, which is the middle of a biennium, so they don't fall off the wall until the end of this year. So we can take it up. So for the record, ma'am.
I'll start.
I'll start,
Okay.
yep.
For the record, Teresa Wood, Chair of House Human Services.
Taylor Slum from the News Team, member of the House Human Services Committee.
And Jen Harvey, Legislative Council, filling in for Michelle Childs.
Thank you for coming in. So how about we do it this way? Do we want to have the sponsors of the bill give us a brief what's going on, and then we're going to ask Jen to walk us through, and then we're going to have our JFO go through the fiscal note. And we have you until 2:30. Okay.
I'll just start off by just giving a few opening remarks, and then I'll turn it over to Representative Small. I'm sure she's going to give you data about overdose and deaths. So I'm going to speak to the high level of what this bill is aiming to do. And that is to prevent further deaths from overdoses in the state of Vermont. It's a harm reduction tool. It addresses liability, requires data, requires research and evaluation. And just yesterday at the Governor's Public Safety Conference in Waterbury, Commissioner Levine stated that while Vermont has a fairly comprehensive array of prevention and treatment services, one of the things that it does not have is an overdose prevention center. I will say that we are looking at a couple of changes to the bill, which we will go over. But I do want to say that one of the things that is really propelling us forward on this is to try to prevent additional deaths in the state of Vermont due to overdoses. And we firmly believe, and the data does support this, that this is another tool in our toolbox. And I want to be clear that we are adding this to existing systems of support that Vermont does have in terms of the hub and spoke system, in terms of recovery centers, which we don't have enough of, or recovery housing. But we do have elements of a system. But I think we all can agree that coupled with everything that we are hearing in the news about the issues of people who are homeless, many of whom have a substance use disorder, that we need to do something different. We need to add to our toolbox, and we firmly believe that this is a way to do it. One of the things I also wanted to point out that was just released from the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And I'm just going to read from their feasibility and findings that they issued a report on the feasibility of establishing overdose prevention centers in Massachusetts. And they stated, faced with the urgency of the overdose crisis, OPCs represent an evidence-based, life-saving tool that is aligned with a comprehensive public health approach to reducing harm and improving well-being in the Commonwealth. After considering existing resources and capacity, DPH, the Department of Public Health, believes that OPC establishment is feasible and necessary, pending legislative action to extend legal protections, and recommends that OPCs be pursued as an additional tool to address the harms of substance use. We address those issues in this bill. I'll turn it over to Representative Small.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Recognizing that Vermont is about to set another record this year with not only overdoses, where in Burlington alone we've seen over 300 this year, with our emergency services feeling drained, feeling like they are needing to put solutions out there and find other ways to respond. We know that this is a necessary tool in our tool belt to address overdose deaths in particular. And I think one of the main pieces that we look at is a statewide approach to this. And I think what has been really instrumental in this past year in the testimony that we've received is that we've taken something that has been theoretical, that has been implemented in other countries, and made it tangible by being able to learn directly from researchers who come from British Columbia and Canada, as well as researchers down in Rhode Island who are also implementing an overdose prevention center in the upcoming year, using their opioid abatement settlement funds to do so. And now Vermont is no longer on the cutting edge to be able to pass legislation to put overdose prevention centers in place. Rhode Island has already set the roadmap for us on how this can be done, with us taking a very similar approach. And I think, as Madam Chair has just highlighted, Massachusetts is close to follow. So I will let us walk through the bill itself, but recognizing that this is not the silver bullet. This is not going to solve all of the problems when it comes to overdoses in our communities, but it's necessary in order to get folks into treatment and to preserve life.
So I heard from both you and the chair that changes that your committee is going to be looking at, and we have not quite figured out the mechanism. The bill's with us, and I'm assuming it's going to go to the floor from here. It's not going on. So we'll have to coordinate on the 3rd I don't know if we know what those changes are, but let's go through the bill, and if we've got time, you can highlight them and just know that that's either going to be coming out of our committee or offered by your committee on the floor.
Okay.
But we'll see how we get that through.
I did want to say, Madam Chair, that in case people had looked at this previously on your website, it was not the right version of the bill, but I believe Aaron has posted the right version now. The original version was the as introduced, and we did a strike all in our committee, and it has been to the House Ways and Means Committee, and they passed out the same bill that we sent them.
Okay. Great. This is why I got a second.
6.1 is the right version, yes.
6.1
Yes,
is the copy.
1243 on 5/8/23.
All right. Representative Harrison.
Because we sometimes get sound bites in the media, you're calling us the overdose prevention centers. Is that the same as safe injection sites?
We do not use that term here on purpose.
But is it, would a layperson kind of say this is the same thing?
A layperson would probably say that is the same thing. We look at this as, again, a tool to prevent overdoses, and it is a tool to provide medical care and reduce the reliance on emergency services personnel. So it's I guess what I would call a more comprehensive view of what a center would provide as opposed to quote unquote just a safe injection site.
Okay, and can you tell me where the administration's input on this bill? It seems to me the governor vetoed something a couple of years ago having to do with safe injection sites, and I don't know what the difference is between.
I can tell you exactly what the difference is. So the difference was 2 years ago, we had a bill, I think it was H728. Don't hold me exactly on the number, but it was 728. That actually merely wanted to study the feasibility, similar to what they did in Massachusetts, where they just issued the report. Yeah. So in the meantime, we've had sufficient data and more time for testimony and to take a deeper dive, and we've moved beyond the studying phase and believe that this is the right thing to do in terms of the data and the testimony that we took. I can tell you that in recent conversations with the Vermont Department of Health Commissioner, Dr. Levine, he has definitely softened on this idea, understanding that Vermont is, as Representative Small said, poised this year, again, unfortunately, to break last year's previous broken record in terms of deaths and overdoses, there's an acknowledgement that we need additional tools in the toolbox. I can't tell you what the governor will do with this bill, but I know that the Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee strongly recommends overdose prevention sites, and that the commissioner has definitely softened on the idea, and I'm sure would say so here in front of your committee. The last time I spoke with him, he said that he did plan to talk to the governor's office about that.
If I may just add one other piece, Madam Chair. The language change from safe injection sites or facilities to overdose prevention networks has a twofold approach. One is reducing that stigma of the imagery that comes up when you think of a safe injection facility really limits what is actually being offered in those sites, especially when we're talking about having medical care present, getting connections to referrals, as well as naloxone or a clean needle exchange. And then when we're looking at overdose prevention sites, we're also realizing that folks are not only injecting these drugs today. And actually, to reduce the risk of overdose, medical professionals are actually instructing folks on a variety of ways to use the same substances that they were planning on using, but in a way that would prevent them from getting to a place of overdose. And so with the Overdose Prevention Centers, it is more of an educational space as well as one that provides those wraparound supports.
The other thing I do want to say is that the bill is very clear about they do not acquire the substances at the center, at that site. They do not acquire the substances there. That is something I just want to be clear about.
Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Great. You want to walk through the language?
Thank you for standing in.
Sure.
I appreciate that.
This means I have the subject matter experts on either side of me. So this is H72. As the chair said, this is a strike all amendment from the Human Services Committee that has been through Ways and Means and is now before, or will be before this committee. So section 1, it's an act relating to harm reduction in criminal justice response to drug use. Section 1 adds to an existing section on immunity from liability dealing with regulated drugs, which is kind of the Vermont statutes speak for controlled substances. This adds in a few new provisions relating to these overdose prevention centers. The first provision gives immunity from liability, so nobody would be cited, arrested, or prosecuted for unlawful possession of a drug in violation of the chapter or subject to property forfeiture provisions for participating in or with an overdose prevention center that has been approved for operation. And you'll see in a couple of subsections. And so that immunity is for the person using the services of the center, someone who works at the center, and the person who owns the property where the center is located and operates. And then it specifies that the immunity provisions only apply to the use and derivative use of evidence gained as approximate results of participation in or with the overdose prevention center. So it doesn't give blanket immunity for out in the world using or possessing illegal substances, but in using the services of the center. So then for the overdose prevention center, it describes all of the things that an overdose prevention center is and does, providing, and a lot of these are just formal versions of what you heard from the two members. So it provides a supervised space where people can, who use drugs can consume, and this is where that language comes in. The chair was speaking of pre-obtained drugs and medication for substance use disorder. So it's not that they're getting substances on site, they've pre-obtained them. The center provides harm reduction supplies and collects needles and syringes and securely disposes of them. Provides a lot of information, as you heard from Representative Small. So answering questions, providing referrals, educating participants about how to use the drugs more safely or prevent overdose or prevent contracting diseases, things like that. Administers first aid, provides reasonable security, establishes operating procedures, and trains staff members to deliver the services. Then I would have the health department in consultation with stakeholders and departments in other states with these centers developing operating guidelines. Subsection M goes through the application and approval process. So someone would apply to the health department. This can be a fixed location or a mobile unit or both. And it can be a safe syringe program applying to operate one of these overdose prevention centers. And then it talks about the process for issuing and approving the application, and approval is for a period of 2 years and it can be renewed. And there's some annual reporting requirements for the overdose prevention centers. They would need to make publicly available annually the number of program participants, the identified demographic information, the number of overdoses and reversed overdoses that occurred on site, and the number of times emergency medical services and law enforcement were contacted and responded, and then the number of participants who were directly and formally referred to other services and the types of those services. Sections 2 and 3 are really some mainly language updates in the definition of and use of the organized community-based needle exchange program. So the first is to take out some limiting language about who can operate an organized program. And section 3 has again some updating language, and then specifically says that a needle exchange program can apply to be an overdose prevention center. Next couple sections are part of the reason I think that this is here. This is the manufacturer fee in the Medicaid program. So this is an existing fee in section 4, and then section 5 is the fund that the fee goes into. This is an existing fee where annually each manufacturer of prescription drugs or labeler of prescription drugs that are paid for by the Department of Vermont Health Access for people on Medicaid, Dr. Dinosaur, and B-Farm has to pay a fee based on their previous calendar year's prescription drug spending, and the current rate of that fee is 1.75%. The bill would increase that to 2.25%. And it lists, there's a long list in subsection B of what the fees collected under the section can be used for. Most of these are existing law. You can see down starting on line 14, this would add and grants to overdose prevention centers to address the harms of the opioid epidemic. That would be a use of the fee money, and similar change made in section 5 which is the Evidence-Based Education and Advertising Fund. This is where those fees land. This is where they're deposited. And it's that same list of authorized uses of the fund, and added to that list near the bottom of page 7 is grants to overdose prevention centers to address the harms of the opioid epidemic. We got some more fiscal sections. Section 6 would authorize the use of $1 million in fiscal year 2025 from that evidence-based education and advertising fund to the health department to award grants for overdose prevention centers to applicants who demonstrate that they can run such a program. And then section 7 would have the health department, and section 8 you'll see will appropriate $300,000 for this, but would have the Department of Health by December 1st of 2024 contract with a researcher or a consultant who has expertise in either rural addiction or overdose prevention centers or both to study the impact of rolling out those pilot programs that $1 million in section 6 provides for. And so it would have them look at the current impacts of the drug overdose in Vermont and then changes that occur for up to 4 years following implementation of those pilot programs. And it has the researcher or independent consultant governed by certain goals, looking at the current state of overdose crisis and deaths across the state and the impact of the overdose prevention centers on those, with focusing on the communities where those pilot programs are established to see what the result has been. Current crime rates in those communities, and then again, the impact of putting the overdose prevention center in that community, what the impact is on crime rates, current rates of syringe litter, and then what is the impact of having these overdose prevention center pilot programs in the communities on syringe litter, emergency medical response calls related to overdoses. What is the current number in Vermont, particularly in those communities, and what is the impact of having these centers operating? What is the current rate of syringe service program participant uptake of treatment and recovery services? So people are currently in a syringe service program. How frequently are they taking up an offer of treatment and recovery services? And then what is the impact of having these overdose prevention centers operating on that take-up rate? And the impact of overdose prevention center pilot programs on the number of emergency response calls related to overdoses across Vermont. Again, focusing on those communities in particular. And it would have annual updates, annual reports to the General Assembly on or before January 15th of each year, with a final report on the results of the study and any recommendations by January 15th of 2029. Section 8, again, is that $300,000 I mentioned for the section 7 study on the impact of these overdose prevention center pilot programs. And the act would take effect on July 1st.
Well done. All right. So Representative Bloomley, then Representative Holly, Representative Harrison, and maybe me.
Thank you. That was a very speedy run through. And I just have two substantive questions. One relates to whether these OPCs will also have drug testing capacity so that someone will know if what they're taking is going to be, is laced. The second relates to the webinar that we all attended that was sponsored by ComStat in Burlington, where I think it was Rhode Island Research, might have been the other researcher, but they talked about collecting information about where people lived in relation to that center. Because the worry that communities have is that everybody's going to go flock to that community from other parts of the state. And so in addition to crime rates and public use of drugs outside the OPC, that seemed to be an important thing to track. And I just mentioned that because it struck me when I was listening to the researcher that I would never have thought of that, but it seemed important.
Certainly the elements that are listed in the bill are not all inclusive. You know, these are what we consider to be the minimal elements.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, has been good feedback about that and also can, you know, actually probably help to dispel the misinformation that comes about when, you know, people have this perception that that will happen and actually hasn't been shown to happen in the places where these exist already. I did want to say, because at the beginning of this bill, and I forgot to mention it, you know, we all talk about, it talks about the immunity sections. This bill did take a drive-through judiciary committee as well. And so they have reviewed this and gave us feedback and made some minor tweaks. And so they did not feel the need to take possession of the bill, but they are good with it as it stands. The other thing that I do want to say, now that Ms. Carby has, you know, gone through the whole bill, we chose the manufacturer fee on purpose because it directly relates. The drugs that are manufactured by these companies are directly related to the cause and effect of the overdoses that and substance use that we are seeing. So I always think about former Treasurer Beth Pierce in my head when she said, well, whenever we have something that we're instituting, there should be a correlation to what you're instituting with what you're going to use the money for. And that is directly related here. So we chose this particular fund because there are actually more than enough uses for the opioid abatement fund that are being requested. And this is a fund that is ongoing in nature. It is there on an ongoing basis. It's not time limited. And so we felt it was perhaps a better fit than the opioid settlement fund, which is not going to be it'll be long running, but not in perpetuity the way this fee is in perpetuity. And I feel like there was one other thing. Oh, and then I didn't mention at the outset, but one of the things that the data shows us is that when people use alone, that is when the highest likelihood of overdose deaths occur. You can't help somebody into recovery if they're dead. I mean, that's just it sounds crass, but that's just the facts of the matter. And so if we can keep people alive, they have the opportunity to make changes in their life, and it impacts not just their own, but their loved ones and their friends and a whole community around them. And as we know, if you talk to any emergency services personnel, whether it's ambulance or fire departments or police, they're going to tell you the number one thing that they're responding to right now is this epidemic. And, you know, you can talk to people who walk down Church Street and seeing, you know, needles and things like that. And our aim is not to try to fix all the problems of the world, let me tell you, but I do believe that we will have an impact on that. And that is what we are aiming to do. This is not just about the people who have substance use disorder. This is about a whole community approach, and the whole community will benefit from these overdose prevention centers. And I think that I just wanted to be clear about that at the outset.
And if I might just add about drug checking, we have not specified in this bill that drug checking would be provided at these facilities. We know that the opioid abatement settlement committee decided in the last iteration to provide about 7 machines across the state of Vermont. I think those RFPs are currently active and folks are applying for them. But what we have heard from folks in testimony is that combining the drug checking with the overdose prevention centers is one of the best practices that we can have. So as long as we get this across the finish line, then I think adding drug checking to those facilities is a top priority.
Thanks very much. Representative Mahaly?
Thank you. This is really great. Is $1 million enough? In other
Oh, what a
words-
question.
In other words,
I'm sorry.
I didn't even set him up.
I think it's my turn.
what's bothering me is, I mean, to be concrete, you're asking someone to either rent a place, staff it up, and with an uncertain future, because you've got this pending study going on, which will go on, I mean, this study doesn't have an end date, does it? It's
4 years.
Yeah.
4 years. So does that mean they are operating under a cloud, that maybe the study will conclude that they don't work? I mean, what's the assurance? If I come in and I'm gonna enter into a 5-year lease or what? Or buy a trailer and hire some doctors or whatever, staff it up? Are people gonna do it?
Right.
For $1 million?
Well, we have significant interest already. The city of Burlington testified in our committee. The city of Burlington is ready, willing, and anxious to host a site. We would also like to establish one in southern Vermont. So your question about is $1 million enough? We actually, whether it's an amendment here or it's an amendment offered by our committee or somehow along the way, I'm not exactly sure how the process will go. But we really would like to look at doubling that to $2 million. And there has been information submitted to the opioid advisory committee citing $2.6 million. But we also know that it will take some time to get this up and running, and we feel like $2 million would be sufficient to establish 2 sites. There'll be an amendment coming someplace from somewhere, yes. I'm not exactly sure if it'll happen here or it'll happen
This will be a
elsewhere.
question for Nolan, is like the fee that's in here create enough to cover the?
Yeah. And the other thing that we would also like to do is, you'll see the effective date is out of whack because I think I forgot, what is it?
July 1, 24.
24, yeah. So we don't want July 1, 24. We want effective upon passage. Because we want people to begin to work on this as soon as the bill is passed in order to be able to implement in 25, FY 25.
All right, we've got 5 minutes and,
Sorry.
no,
Yeah, one piece I just will add is that until the study is happening for a total of 5 years, there is no sunset on this legislation. So folks in community would be able to privately fundraise, and as long as they are within the guidelines that are going to be provided by the Department of Health, would be able to open an overdose prevention facility that was privately funded or conjointly funded by the state.
Thank you.
great. Representative Harrison, and then I'll wrap it up.
So we were given some discouraging news this morning in that our budget going forward to the next year might be like a 1.5% increase in base fund. Other than the grants coming out of the opioid fund, where is the ongoing money for operating these centers?
That is the ongoing money for operating these centers.
$1 million?
As I said, the estimates that there's a private group of individuals that are estimating the costs, including staff, including building, including supplies, including insurances, all of the things that you would need. They estimate at 2.6. But we will hear from JFO in a moment about the health of the manufacturer fee fund, and that's why we chose the manufacturer fee fund, because it is ongoing in nature. So the only, and I'm not sure, Nolan may be correct me on this, I think that the only cost to the general fund would be the
300,000.
300,000 for the research.
One time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Nolan's going to start to get ready to walk us through the fiscal note, but as he's going, I just wanted to make my own. I've been a part of state government when methadone, what didn't belong, was not in the state at all. And there was a tremendous uncomfortableness statewide about, why would you give people, And it really took a lot of work to get to, and I'm gonna make an assumption here, which I don't, that this process, now looking at other states who helped Vermont get to where we are, we said Rhode Island, Massachusetts, sometimes we're ahead of the curve and sometimes we're dragged along. But it's really good to see where we are today from where we were then, but we still can go better. But this is evidence-based activity. Okay, so that's, check that point. It's a pilot for, at this point, for one, maybe two sites, and the study to provide more data as it goes through. Okay, and the rules and guidelines are going to be created by the Vermont Department of Health and others.
Yes.
Then goes to Elkhart?
I will say that they specifically chose to issue operating guidelines. The health department in testimony specifically chose to do operating guidelines. And we were very specific about consulting with other states, knowing that Rhode Island had gone through a regulatory process. New York, the two sites in New York City have not gone through a regulatory process. And Massachusetts is also looking at they're kind of sort of at the same stage that we are, that they are going to be seeking the same thing that we're seeking right now. We're probably, like, I would say, a half a step ahead of them.
In this journey, because it's what I noticed that it's New England.
Yeah.
New England based, it's not like somebody, I'm like, no, they're just, Iowa or something. It's somebody that's within our own neighborhood.
And the other thing that I want to say, because, when you just referenced methadone, I was at the Department of Mental Health when they were, and that was all really coming about. And one of the things that I want to say is that on a personal level, I never would have thought that I would be sitting here and saying that I am radically encouraging people to vote for an overdose prevention center. I never thought that I personally would be voting for an overdose prevention center. It was sort of out of the realm of my personal experiences, personal thought process, and I can tell you that not everybody who is going to sit on the floor in a few weeks and have an opportunity to vote on this bill will have been through what we've gone through in committee and gone through that process. I hope that they will trust that we have done the work required to understand that this is a right next step. Like I said, I personally 3 years ago would not have voted for this. I sit here today in front of your committee saying that it is absolutely the thing that we need to do. One of the things that we need to do.
The reality of what's happening out in Vermont right now is like, oh my goodness, we need to do evidence-based responses on things, and we can do some things quickly. All right, for Nolan to come in, I've got 3.5, you've got 3.
I can sit right here.
Okay.
Oh, it's just our break, so that's okay.
You don't do it.
Get us used to being,
Okay.
Go ahead.
For the record, Noel Nagwell, the Joint Fiscal Office. I feel that Rep. Wood and Rep. Small and Jen really have done all the heavy lifting. So I'll be very, very brief. Sections 4 and 5, they're the manufacturer fee. That increases the manufacturer fee for the evidence-based manufacturer fee and the evidence-based education and advertising fund. So it raises the fee from 1.75 to 2.25. That as estimated to raise about 1.3 million additional dollars. And then the money from that fee is deposited into the evidence-based education fund. There is Aaron also posted a little issue brief I did last year that kind of gives a basic description of what that fund is, what the allowable uses are, how much money is in it, how much it raises, et cetera. It's just kind of a good backgrounder. And to Rep. Wood's point, this fits within those uses, but they did add a new definition into the language that would include a definition that says grants to overdose prevention centers to address the harm of the opioid epidemic. So that would create it as an allowable and germane use of the fund. And then section 6 is the pilot, that's $1 million. Section 7 and 8 is the study and appropriation of $300,000. And as Rep. Wood mentioned, that would be general funds. So if you look at this, the second page of my fiscal note, you'll see, just have a very, a nice chart that sort of says what sections, what it does, what fund it goes to, et cetera.
So the $300,000 general fund is already in the Department of Health, or is it something that would need to be added in when we pass this?
I don't know.
I don't know.
My guess is they would tell you that they don't have 300,000 hanging around, but.
I mean, ultimately, this was done during a session with the idea that if the bill passed, if the bill passed, then you would put it in your budget.
So even if we pass it over, it's with the thought that this is, we'll have to either, Senate does this to us, they'll send over a bill hanging on to the thought that they've already booked something for that's coming in the future. So, all right.
Yeah, or you can probably do it in the budget adjustment, or.
If we went to 2 million, if we follow the direction for the 2 million, does this fee need to change, or do you feel that there's enough in the?
Well, whether they increase the fee is up to you. There is 2.6 million of unobligated dollars in the fund
already.
And that's taking into consideration how much, in their budget, the health department's budget, they already obligated a lump sum money for fiscal year 24 in that. And that's this 2.6 is after you take into consideration what they've already budgeted. So that's an obligation.
So between now and the 3rd, maybe I'll talk to you about how do we get some answers and who do we get them from in order to be ready.
To summarize, there is sufficient funds in that education fund for this.
Correct.
Not the ed fund.
No, I'm sorry. Education.
Just,
no.
Sorry that I wasn't as clear as Representative Wood. Yes, there is sufficient funds if you wanted to take an additional $1 million. There is.
About us touching anything in the general fund. The evidence-based education.
If it's going towards the OPCs.
Madam Chair, just a quick question. Did the healthcare providers, Blue Cross Blue Shield and others, did they take a position on this? Because in a way, their drug programs would probably pay the added fee indirectly, but on the other hand, their costs will go down because of, if to the extent the program is effective, did they testify or otherwise?
I'm not clear on the role that you're saying for the private insurers.
Well, the private insurers pay the cost of drugs. And if every drug has embedded in its price a fee, they're not going to just absorb that. They'll pass it up. They'll pass it on in the form of increased.
So to dig back into the catacombs of when this fee was initially went into place, when we asked the lobbyists at the time whether this would impact premiums for Vermont, the answer was no, because it's just, they wouldn't take that money and just put it on Vermont drugs. It would just be spread across everything. So it would be the amount of money it is. The answer at the time, I can't hold them to this now, is that this wouldn't be reflected in Vermont specific premiums.
Okay. So they didn't have anything.
But that's an old answer from years ago.
so I'm thinking the fee piece, we heard this has already gone through Ways and Means. So that means Ways and Means has already voted on and approved this fee.
Yes, 10-2.
Okay, well, that helps me.
So we're interested in the 300K. So we're interested in the 300,000, right?
Well, that would be, yes, that would be a direct piece that we would need to account for in some way.
Yeah.
Look for you to figure out how we.
And again, like if this had passed during the regular session,
It would have.
you would have just put it in one of your, you would have built it into your budget.
All right, well, good, that's a good flyby and dig, and we'll just get some questions on the 300,000 and how we deal with that. Otherwise, we'll be taking this up hopefully then on the 3rd unless there's something, and then, because everything goes into this would be your bill on the floor then, because you are, so.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Just saying, we want you to be surprised January 3rd.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Welcome very much.
And the full committee appreciate your attention to this important
Well,
topic.
we appreciate you. There are some benefits to not having the BAA presented just yet because we get to do all this other work that we've been wanting to do anyway. So we can go offline. We'll be back at 2:45
with, let me see. Oh, flood